Arnold, and I'm a researcher at the University of St. Andrews. I'm here to answer your questions about plants, forests, and biodiversity. Over the past week, we've received so many amazing questions, and unfortunately, I don't have time to answer them all right now. But here are some answers to my top 3 questions. We'll start with Jane's question. Jane asked why forest soil doesn't get depleted of nutrients in the same way that agricultural land does. Great question, Jane. Before we jump in, let's talk about soil. Soil is mostly made up of bits of rock and organic matter that's left over after plants decay. But it's also an intricate ecosystem all on its own. There are many different kinds of microbes and fungi and soil invertebrates like worms that are hugely important to breaking down plant and animal tissues and making nutrients available to the plants living in the soil and just overall soil fertility. So from here on out, I'll be calling this living part of the soil microbiome. Soil depletion and erosion are major problems though, so let's start there. Why does soil get depleted on farmland in the first place? A lot of the reason comes down to disturbance. When the soil is constantly tilled and disturbed by farm vehicles, not to mention the annual crops are constantly harvested and then they die off and other plants are planted each year, and so on. This all makes this nutrient-rich top layer of soil really vulnerable to being washed away by flooding or rain or to being blown away by the wind. All the disturbance, as well as the overuse of agrochemicals like fertilizers, can upset the intricate soil microbiome as well. And when you harvest and remove what's left of the crop, it means that nutrients are continually being taken out of the soil. In forests, on the other hand, there is far less disturbance, and the roots of trees and other plants keep the soil firmly in place. Unlike most crops, which are only good for 1 year, trees can live for hundreds of years, and so keep the soil structure in place for the long term. Forests are continually making soil. They build up a lot of organic matter from fallen trees and leaf litter, like when the trees shed their leaves in autumn, and all this organic matter is then decomposed and contributes to new soil formation. So forests make a lot of soil, and they can hold on to it too. Trees act as storm breaks, so you're less likely to get strong winds in the middle of a forest, and roots help water percolate deep down into the earth quickly, so the top layers of soil are less likely to be washed away during a storm. Basically, this means that the soil in forests is less vulnerable compared to open agricultural land. And of course, because the soil can go relatively undisturbed in forests for hundreds of years, they keep those complex soil microbiome networks intact. There has been a lot of research projects and conservation initiatives looking into the best ways we can protect and improve our soils. And one of the solutions is forest farming, where you would grow shade-tolerant crops under a forest canopy, which is pretty cool. All right, moving on to question 2. Both Mark and Sophie had really similar questions about how to boost biodiversity in our gardens and local areas. Thanks for asking. There are a lot of ways that we can boost biodiversity in our gardens and in our communities, and not all of them will be right for everyone in every situation, but all that we do, every little bit counts. The first way you can support wildlife is to stop mowing your lawn, or at least mow it less often. And I know that some people think an unmown lawn looks messy, so if this is something that you're concerned about, then I would encourage you to get creative and arrange your no-mow lawn in a way that it's clear that the long grass is intentional. Or you can just reduce the amount of lawn space you have, or replace your lawn altogether with other more beneficial plants like native wildflowers. And this brings me to my second suggestion. Plant native wildflowers. Wildflower meadow habitats can provide food and shelter for a whole host of animals. Native plant species are generally better at supporting native wildlife, so when in doubt, I would stick with those. And try to choose plants that flower at slightly different times so that we can make the flowering season as long as possible. It also helps to plant a diverse array of flowering plants, including flowers that are different shapes, sizes, and colors, since they can attract different animal species. Plants which produce fruit and berries that wildlife can eat is another great way that we can support wildlife. What plants are best for your nature space really depends on where you live, and there are tons of great resources online which can help you choose which plants to support wildlife. So I would suggest that you go and look that up for your area. Alongside this, we should stop using artificial fertilizers and pesticides in our gardens where possible. If you feel you need to improve the soil, why not compost your food scraps? Or you can make a comfrey or banana skin tea. And if you're worried about pests, there are safer alternatives to pesticides, like companion planting. Another way that you can support biodiversity is by making a pond. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, even a very small pond can contribute to biodiversity. And they can be made really easily from recycled materials. Ponds are one of the few ways that we can support amphibians, and they're great for bats and invertebrates too. Just make sure that there's a shallow area or a way for small animals to easily get in and out on at least one edge. Ponds act as stepping stones which allow wildlife to move throughout the landscape, so try to position your pond so that it's connected to larger natural areas. Planting trees and shrubs can also benefit wildlife. They are especially beneficial when used to connect one green space, like a park or a forest, with another. This is an example of what we called wildlife corridors, where by connecting two larger green spaces with a hedgerow, we allow wildlife to travel between them, and in this way we're increasing the amount of natural space wildlife has access to. Another way you can help support biodiversity is by providing wildlife with homes. These can include bird boxes, bad boxes, hedgehog hides, and insect hotels. You can find building plans for these and others online. Some of them can be made out of materials that you just have lying around anyway. Or if you prefer, you can just buy pre-made wildlife homes too. The size, model, and location of a wildlife home can affect what species will use it, so it's worth looking into which model works best for the species you want to attract to your nature space beforehand. Wildlife homes should also be cleaned regularly. Birdhouses, for example, should be cleaned really thoroughly every winter. You can provide habitat for wildlife super easily too by creating a log pile. All you have to do is get some medium to large size logs, stick them in a pile, and just let them be. Super simple. Log piles attract all sorts of wildlife, including amphibians, insects, mosses, lichens, and fungi. One last thing I want to mention is our dear pets. For those of us with dogs and cats, especially outdoor cats, it's important to consider how they might be impacting the wildlife we have in our gardens, and to set up our nature spaces in ways that the wildlife is safe and to not scare off the wildlife. If you don't have access to a garden, but are still keen on supporting biodiversity in your area, you can always plant plants in planter pots or window boxes, or you can talk to your local governing body about starting a local community garden or improving existing parks and green spaces for biodiversity. Or you can just simply change the way that you see green spaces. I know in my community, the green spaces around our town are often manicured in ways that aren't good for biodiversity because they look neater. And when the gardening teams try to leave space for wildlife, they sometimes get complaints from the public. So just a simple change in perception that wild and unruly natural spaces have a beauty all their own can go a long way towards supporting biodiversity. That's really only scratching the surface, but these are some of the actions that I think are both simple and effective. There are so many innovative ideas out there, like using living walls or the bee highways in Oslo. So if you're interested, you should definitely look more into this. All right, I'm short on time, so I'm moving on to the last question. Last but not least, we have Frank's excellent question: how important are forests to biodiversity? Forests are home to a diverse range of species. If we just look at tropical forests alone, even though they only cover about 7% of Earth's land area, over 50% of all known species can be found within tropical forests. And it's estimated that forests in general account for 75% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity overall. Some species like pine martens, sloths, and orangutans are forest dependent and so rely really heavily on forests to survive. So forests are some of the world's most important terrestrial ecosystems when it comes to the maintenance of biodiversity. In short, they're incredibly important. And that wraps everything up. I hope you all enjoyed these answers. We also had an excellent question from Jamie about plant communication, so if you want to learn more about that, I covered it in an earlier post I made for the Backyard BioBlitz. And while you're there, if you'd like to learn more about biodiversity, why not take part in the Backyard BioBlitz this Friday and Saturday, the 5th and 6th of June. Next week, we'll be answering your questions about Greek myth and women in the ancient world. So if you haven't already, send your questions about Greek myth and women in the ancient world to this email address, or post them in the comments by Friday the 5th of June. Remember to take part in the Backyard BioBlitz this Friday and Saturday the 5th and 6th. Thanks for watching. Bye!